One thing I've learned from the work that I do is that the men who complain that women are too emotional are typically the most emotional people. But they just don't understand that anger is an emotion and don't know how to process it, which usually results in violence, particularly against women. And our two stories today feature men with these exact mentalities. Our first story is about Italian model Pamela Genini, who lived a life of glamour. But her fairy tale ended in tragedy when she was brutally murdered by her boyfriend. Now, witness statements are revealing the dark truth about his troubling behavior leading up to her death. Then, on New Year's Eve 2024, Jonathan Rinderknecht started one of the most devastating fires in California's history. Let's get into it.
An Italian model and entrepreneur was allegedly stabbed 20 times to death by her boyfriend inside her Milan apartment.
In a horrific twist, neighbors were able to see what was happening. They just couldn't do anything to stop it.
Hi, I'm Katie Ring, and this is Crime House Daily, your weekday true crime companion. We follow the cases making headlines now where justice is still unfolding. This is a First Watch episode bringing you today's biggest crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Crime House Daily so you never miss an episode. This episode discusses active criminal cases and breaking news. The information we share is based on what's publicly available at the time of recording and may change as new evidence comes to light. We aim to inform, not to decide guilt or innocence. So everyone mentioned is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Our first story today is the devastating murder of 29-year-old Italian model Pamela Genini. On October 14th, 2025, Pamela was stabbed to death on her balcony by her 52-year-old boyfriend, Gianluca Soncin. And one of the most terrifying parts was that her neighbors could see the attack from their balconies, but couldn't get there in time to help. I can't even imagine witnessing that. Gianluca is now in police custody and facing charges, but he refuses to talk. However, Pamela's loved ones told authorities that Gianluca was extremely abusive and she was trying to get out of the relationship. I'm not as familiar with Italian law, but the police actually witnessed him stabbing her, so I'm hoping it's pretty open and shut. But for now, Pamela's loved ones are focusing on honoring her memory. Pamela Genini was born in 1996 in the small, charming town of Strozza in northern Italy, about an hour outside of Milan. Known for its medieval architecture, rich history, and scenic beauty, Pamela always had a passion for modeling and photography, which started out as more of a hobby when she was 8, but when she turned 16, she decided to take the plunge and turn modeling into a career, and her parents were extremely supportive. In 2015, when Pamela was 19 years old, she was cast in a controversial Italian reality show called The Island of Adam and Eve. As the title implies, contestants met each other naked on a desert island. It sounds kind of like the Italian Naked and Afraid, but don't quote me on that because I haven't actually watched either show. Despite the show being a little scandalous, the host calls Pamela a pure soul, and the viewers fall in love with her as well. After appearing on the show, her Instagram following blows up. Her followers loved her personality, her style, and keeping up with her glamorous lifestyle. She was constantly going on luxurious vacations, hanging out on yachts, or walking the red carpet. And she almost always had her chihuahua, Bianca, with her. Pamela was also driven. Besides social media and modeling, she started a bikini company with her friend Elisa Borolotti. The two shared a passion for fashion and the sea, so they created something that mixed the two. She also branched out and began running a luxury real estate agency in Milan and moved to an upscale part of the city. She had her own fabulous penthouse apartment where she lived alone, enjoying views of the elegant villas and historic landmarks around her. It was the perfect home for her. She was living in her dream apartment and her life seemed perfect. But it was far from it. She had been dating 52-year-old Gianluca for more than a year. Gianluca was a wealthy, well-connected businessman, and on paper, they seemed perfect for each other, despite the 23-year age difference. But Pamela has been unhappy for months. To start, Gianluca may not have made an entirely honest living. In 2010, he was arrested for alleged involvement in a financial scam, an operation that sold luxury cars at artificially low prices and evaded taxes with false invoices. But it wasn't just his shady past Pamela was concerned about. Pamela's loved ones believed Gianluca was extremely jealous, controlling, and abusive. Since this investigation is ongoing, those allegations haven't been confirmed. But from this crime and my experience in this field, he definitely fits the bill. But one thing is certain. By October 2025, Pamela decides to end things with Gianluca. While traveling, Gianluca got enraged and started threatening her with glass and told her that he was going to kill her dog. It got so bad that the hotel staff had to interfere. And later, he also threatened to hurt her and her mother if she ever left. She was terrified. So while Pamela wanted a way out, she had to be careful about how she approached the matter. Please, if you are planning to leave an abuser, plan ahead, move in silence, and leave without a word. This applies to men who are psychologically or emotionally abusive as well, not just physically. If you have ever been scared around him, do not tell him you are leaving in person. Leaving is the most dangerous time for victims of domestic violence. And I don't say that to discourage women from leaving. Please leave as soon as it is safe to do so, because it only gets worse. But please also have a plan. On the night of Tuesday, October 14th, 2025, around 9:40 p.m., Pamela was at home chatting on the phone with her ex-boyfriend. They were deep in their conversation, so Pamela didn't even notice that Gianluca had broken into her apartment. On October 14th, 2025, 29-year-old Italian model Pamela Genini discovered her boyfriend, 52-year-old Gianluca Soncin, had broken into her apartment in Milan. Pamela was still on the phone with her ex-boyfriend when she walked into another room and found Gianluca inside. And she was immediately frightened because Gianluca was clearly angry. Pamela knew she was in danger, so she asked her ex for help and then quickly hung up. While she tried to think of what to do next, she realized that Gianluca had secretly made a key to her apartment and used it to get in. She tried to get away from him, and at the same time, she texted her ex and told him Gianluca broke in with a duplicate key. Her mind was racing as she realized whatever Gianluca was about to do, the fact that he had copied the key meant that he had been planning it for a while. So she furiously typed another message to her friend, asking him to call the police. Pamela's friend wasted no time alerting the authorities. Meanwhile, Gianluca started screaming at her. Pamela could tell his anger was growing out of control, so she started screaming for help. The neighbors heard her screams and jumped into action. First, they called the police. Then they tried to get into Pamela's apartment to save her, but they couldn't get in. Fortunately, the police arrived soon, and another neighbor who heard Pamela's cries for help quickly showed them which way to go, and the officers raced to Pamela's top-floor apartment. Inside, Pamela tried to quell Gianluca's rage. She knew that he'd only get angrier once he knew the police were there. So when they buzzed the intercom, Pamela pretended it was a food delivery. She even pretended to be talking to a courier. But this didn't calm Gianluca down at all. Instead, his violent urges took over. He grabbed Pamela and dragged her onto the terrace. Then he pulled out a switchblade and began stabbing her. Neighbors in the adjacent building could see everything. They stood there helpless as Gianluca proceeded to stab Pamela 24 times. When officers finally broke down her door, they saw Gianluca stabbing her and rushed inside. When officers reached her, she was barely breathing, and soon after, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Meanwhile, other officers tried to apprehend Gianluca, but he was still not done. He turned the knife on himself and slashed his own throat twice. He was still conscious, but he was injured, and officers finally get a hold of him, and he was rushed to the hospital in Milan under police supervision. Doctors determined that Gianluca's wounds were only superficial, and they gave authorities clearance to remove him from the hospital. But when they brought him to the station for questioning, Gianluca refused to say anything. So they kept him in solitary confinement at a prison in central Milan, where they shifted gears into other investigative tactics, including searching Gianluca's home. During their searches, investigators found a dozen knives, including box cutters and switchblades, similar to the one he used to kill Pamela. He also had 4 or 5 pistols. But the scariest evidence comes from the investigators' conversations with Pamela's loved ones. They reveal a slew of allegations regarding Gianluca's months of abuse against Pamela. Some people say he had been stalking her. Others say he physically abused her. Others report that Pamela broke up with Gianluca the day before her murder, but authorities weren't able to confirm that yet. However, they did find evidence to support the other claims. Pretty soon, Gianluca was charged with murder aggravated by stalking, premeditation, and femicide, which is when a woman is murdered by someone with a gender-based motive. And in Italy, femicide is prosecuted as an aggravated form of homicide. As of this recording, no court date has been set. For now, Pamela's fans and loved ones are left to mourn the sudden loss and hope that justice will be served. But as always, we'll be sure to bring you all of the major updates. Today's case surrounds one of the most devastating fires in Los Angeles and California history. On New Year's Eve 2024, 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht committed an act of destruction that spiraled way beyond anyone's control. That night, Jonathan started a fire in Pacific Palisades. First responders were able to put out the flames, but that was only the beginning of the nightmare, because soon a sudden phenomenon sparked full-on disaster, leading to one of the most devastating fires in Los Angeles history. Jonathan tried to escape the state, but in the wake of the overwhelming tragedy, authorities tracked him down. And on October 7, 2025, Jonathan was finally arrested. On October 23rd, he pleaded not guilty to charges related to arson and destruction of property. So, what led Jonathan to carry out such a catastrophic event? Let's get into it. 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht grew up in France, but he spent his whole life traveling from place to place, which meant his family and friends were spread out across continents. Even since coming to the US, Jonathan didn't stay in one place long. Since 2016, he had lived in Michigan, Florida, and California. In 2020, when Jonathan was 24 years old, he finally started to put down roots when he moved in with an unidentified romantic partner in the Los Angeles area. However, Jonathan's domestic bliss only lasted a few years because they broke up in 2023. Jonathan didn't want to uproot his entire life, so after the breakup, he stayed in LA. But Jonathan became increasingly lonely and he started to miss his ex. In late 2024, he sent them a text as a way to try and reconnect, but they responded saying they need space. So he tried reaching out to someone else for a bit of companionship, but this person didn't even remember meeting him. Jonathan started to have a really hard time coping with his feelings. He turned to music for comfort and plays one song on repeat, which perfectly matched his mood. It was a French rap song about despair and despondency. Jonathan not only listened to the song, but he watched the music video repeatedly. In it, the artist lit money and piles of garbage on fire, and Jonathan couldn't seem to get the image of flames out of his head. On the night of December 31st, 2024, Jonathan was driving for Uber and picking up DoorDash orders. Jonathan had been making a living this way for a while, And despite knowing that customers can leave reviews about him in the apps, his mood is palpable the entire time. Whenever Jonathan interacted with a customer, he seemed agitated and angry. The only time Jonathan was shaken out of his funk is when he drops an Uber passenger off in his old neighborhood, the Pacific Palisades, a wealthy seaside residential area. Jonathan decided to take a break from working and parked his car at the Skull Rock Trailhead, which was a popular hiking spot, a block away from where he used to live. It was near a street called Lockman Lane. As nostalgia set in, Jonathan tried to call an old friend, but they didn't pick up. So instead, he went for a walk up the trail. Once he reached a nearby hilltop, he recorded some videos on his phone and also listened to his favorite rap song again. Then Jonathan had an idea. He pulled out a lighter and started a fire that would change countless people's lives forever. On New Year's Eve 2024, 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht started a fire in the middle of a hiking trail in the Pacific Palisades in LA. Then, shortly after midnight, while the rest of the city is ringing in the new year, Jonathan turned around and walked back to his car, while the flames grew larger behind him. During the 5-minute walk, he tried to call 911 multiple times, but he didn't have any service, so his calls didn't go through. Finally, he reached the bottom of the hiking trail, and that's when he finally gets through to a dispatcher and reported the fire. Then he got back into his car and drove away. By that point, a nearby resident had already alerted the authorities, and first responders were already rushing to the scene. As Jonathan drove, he saw the fire engines rushing in the opposite direction. Seemingly without thinking, Jonathan pulled a quick U-turn, then sped behind the fire engines, all the way back up to the scene. He parked near the trail again, then walked to the area where firefighters were trying to put out the fire. At 1:02 a.m., he even pulled out his phone to take more videos. A few minutes later, he turned to leave again, and on the way back to his car, Jonathan bumped into the firefighters and offered to help them. But they told him no, so Jonathan left the area for good. Firefighters continued working throughout the next day, and by January 2nd, 2025, they seemed to have fully extinguished what had become later known as the Lockman Fire. However, no one realized that there was more disaster waiting. Something known as a zombie fire or holdover fire was building. The embers of the Lockman Fire were lingering underground, contained by roots and dense vegetation. They smolder unnoticed for days until a week later on January 7th, just before 10:30 a.m., the perfect storm erupted. Hurricane-level winds hit Los Angeles. They were so strong they uprooted the vegetation that held the lingering embers, pulling them to the surface and setting them on fire. The flames grew and spread above ground, fully reigniting into what is now known as the Palisades Fire. Within hours, the fire blazed through the woods and into the surrounding neighborhoods. Multiple homes caught on fire, and they continued to burn through January 8th. In that time, the community experienced devastating, irreversible loss. Many were left without a roof over their heads. Their personal and family histories were lost to the ashes. People were lucky if they even saved their pets. Over the course of 3 weeks, this fire consumed the Pacific Palisades, as well as nearby Topanga and Malibu. It is one of the most destructive wildfires in Los Angeles history, taking the lives of 12 people. Over 23,000 acres burned, along with nearly 7,000 structures, causing $150 billion in damage. And no one could understand how it happened. When authorities got their bearings and began looking into the initial Lockman Fire, they focused on the 911 call that came in from the scene when the fire started, the call from Jonathan. On January 24th, they asked Jonathan to come in and try and help them piece things together. At that time, he told them he was taking a walk on the trail when he spotted the flames. His story seems to check out, so they let him go. But soon, they realized there's a problem with his story. Authorities suspected the Lockman fire was man-made. They also knew exactly when the fire started because environmental sensing platforms had registered it. And when they started collecting cell phone and other geolocation data, they discovered that Jonathan was the only person in the area when the fire began. Not only that, but he was only about 30 feet away from the edge of the fire as it grew. Now, Jonathan's story wasn't adding up, and authorities thought he might have started the fire himself. But they couldn't prove it. Months go by, and members of the public were demanding answers, so investigators scaled up their efforts. The LAPD teamed up with the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, otherwise known as ATF. The Lockman fire was set on land owned by the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, a federally funded organization, and the Palisades Fire burned federal property, which made this a federal case. Together, the team of investigators combed through mountains of evidence, including Jonathan's internet history. As part of the evidence, they collected images that Jonathan generated with ChatGPT, going back months. In July 2024, Jonathan used ChatGPT to create a, quote, dystopian painting divided into two parts. He asked for one side to show a burning forest with people running from the fire, and for the other side to show a gate marked with a gigantic $sign. He then told ChatGPT to place all the world's richest people behind the gate, laughing, dancing, and enjoying themselves while others suffered on the outside. Then in November 2024, Jonathan told ChatGPT that he burned a Bible and that it felt liberating. Authorities also discovered that Jonathan said the same thing to a family member. Now, authorities believed Jonathan may have taken his fantasies into the real world and intentionally started the Lockman fire. But when they tried to bring him in again, they couldn't find him. By October 2025, Jonathan had moved to Melbourne, Florida, to live with his sister, his brother-in-law, and their 2 children. Fortunately, investigators tracked him down, and on October 7th, Jonathan was arrested in Florida and taken into federal custody. On Thursday, October 9th, Jonathan's initial hearing took place in Orlando, Florida, about 70 miles from where he was living. No plea was entered at the time. When it came to letting him out on bond, the prosecutors argued that Jonathan is dangerous, had mental health issues, and violent tendencies, and that his behavior was becoming more erratic. All the while, Jonathan shook his head and swayed side to side in a leather swivel chair. Judge Nathan Hill agreed with the prosecutor. He worries that Jonathan's mental state is deteriorating, and that if he was released from custody, he could pose a threat if he was left alone and unsupervised. So instead of setting a bail amount, Judge Hill ordered Jonathan's detention. In short, Jonathan was denied bail because of mental wellness concerns. His sisters cried and held each other in a courthouse hallway after the hearing. On Wednesday, October 15th, Jonathan returned to court again. This time, a federal grand jury charged him on 3 counts. 1 count of destruction of property by means of fire, 1 count of arson affecting property used in interstate commerce, and 1 count of timber set afire. On October 23rd, in a Los Angeles courtroom, Jonathan pleaded not guilty. If convicted, Jonathan could face anywhere between 5 and 45 years in federal prison. His trial has been set for December 16th and is expected to last 7 to 10 days. Until then, we'll keep you up to date on all of the major developments in this case. As the people affected try to rebuild their lives and mourn those who lost their lives, an entire city waits to see if they'll get answers and hopefully justice. What did you think of today's cases? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments. See you next time. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Crime House Daily and follow us on social media at Crimehouse 24/7 for real-time updates, because the pursuit of justice never stops.